Hi guys, and welcome back to the Rockstar Superhero Podcast. This week on the show, we have a wonderful guest, the heart leader, Martin Barrett. Martin Barrett runs and owns SOZO Wines in the Seattle area. He's a great friend, but Martin, more known as a successful vinter, if that's the term, for years, really running a top winery in Oregon, he really had his heart set on something else. What if a portion of the profits from his company could change the lives of a person immediately, today? So an example might be a safe night for a homeless child or a day of college for a girl rescued from sex trafficking. You know, kind of important things. Martin really had a lot to share with me. He had me reeling a few times, which served to remind me that I too need to listen to this podcast once I post it. Martin shares a lot of great wisdom regarding his focus on the welfare of others, but really also has great business acumen and experience to share. He's a real, true, cellular level entrepreneur and friend, and like I said before, he's a heart leader. So I'm honored to share his views with you today. So sit back, enjoy Rockstar Superhero Podcast number 27 with Martin Barrett, SOZO Wines. Dig it.
We just keep talking away.
Yeah, that's what we do.
I have no idea what this equipment does.
No, you don't need to know, really.
Oh, that's good.
That's why we hire little gnomes for that.
Exactly. That's what we need. We need lots and lots and lots of little gnomes.
So I thought it would be fun to get together, and you seem to think the same thing, that it would just be fun to hang out and tell stories, and maybe you could share a whole bunch about SOZO and what you guys are doing and what drew you and your purpose and your passion and your vision and all that other scary stuff. You can even talk about college if you want.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. There's a lot to say about that.
Now so I want to preface this that we are recording at an office space in Bellevue, and we're in this little tiny room. We're not live, but every once in a while somebody's going to go by and they'll be talking because this is an active, it's a bunker almost for real estate brokers, right?
Got it.
So there will be some noise, but don't worry about it. That's just the way it is. Our audience will just have to fall in love with us anyway.
There we go.
So I like to do these really off the cuff. I've known you for, I believe, almost 4 years now. And one of the things that I really don't like to do, if you will, is do too much research. And a lot of people would say that's madness or even insane. But the truth is I like the discovery process. I want to know about you, and I want to know about your company, and I want to know what SOZO's doing. I want to know these things as though I don't know them at all, right? And even though I do have some background knowledge because I've known you for these 4 years, any listening audience doesn't have a clue, right? So if I talk to you as though we've just met for the first time, and admittedly, I've purposely kept myself blind to some of the finer aspects of what you're doing so we can talk about them. Is that cool?
That sounds fascinating.
I don't want your ego to be destroyed that I didn't do 20 pages of research in advance. But there's a method to my madness, and
I don't know that there's
out.
20 pages to research. So,
well, and I'm not going to ask you about your marriage or anything crazy. But you know what I found, Martin, is people tend to want to know. They want to know the deeper parts, right? So one of the things I've found in my life and career and sort of my business networking relationships is that what people really are desperate to meet is people that lead with the heart. They're desperate for it. And I'm not suggesting that that's the only thing you do, but what I knew about you from the moment I met you, I could discern from you was that gift that was given to me, right? That ability to discern this was a real person who was highly professional, but you weren't positioning yourself to be an egotistical authority, if you will, on anything. I knew by meeting you, you were an authority, and I soon learned that you were an authority about a number of things, but wine is one of them. And that really caught me off guard. You were this real humble business leader right from ground zero, And you didn't blow any smoke up my tailpipe. And that's a big deal when you're hanging out. I mean, we met at a, if you will, a high level, high functioning to-do.
How did I get invited to that?
I don't know. I don't know how I ended up showing up either. But we were both guests of Rob Smith, who runs Thane Boat Works, amongst other things. These big brains with big non-profit ideas, right? People that want to change the world. They want to leave almost, I wouldn't say almost, they want to leave indelible impact, on the world. They're all about legacy. And you are too. And so you're a deeply fascinating guy, and I hoped, this is enough of a ego boost, my own version of an intro. But I just wanted to talk to you about you and how you started and where things began for you. I mean, if you don't mind, can we before we jump into SOZO, can we go back into a little bit of history on Martin Barrett?
Yeah. So married and 3 kids. All of our kids hate us.
Awesome.
The closest one lives in Texas, and then Nashville, and then London. So my wife is great, but obviously I did something that offended them because they're a long ways away from us.
It wasn't careers that led them away. It was just dad.
Oh,
Dad's
that's
a tyrant.
What it was. Careers. Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, maybe it is careers rather than just hating me. But 3 kids and married coming up on 38 years now.
Wow.
So
Did you get married when you were 18 or?
Actually, I was 21. My wife was 20.
Wow.
We actually look at our marriage pictures, and my first thought constantly is, isn't it against the law to get married in junior high?
Right. What am I, Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah, exactly. We're only about 3 generations away from feuding in the Ozarks in our family line. So maybe you did get married to your cousin at 12.
Your family tree's a stump. There's no branches, just straight up.
So anyway, I guess to begin with, pretty much every prism I see things through is with the poor. And how does what we do affect the poor? And I've always had an attraction to those who were not necessarily a part of the cool kids when we were growing up. And that always created a bit of a tension because I was one of those kids. And so when I would bring in these ones that aren't the cool kids, it was kind of a fascinating dimension. But that has been my heart, and it really came to life in college when we started leading Young Life, and part of the area that I worked in was High Point. And I remember my first eye-opening experience of dropping kids off at High Point and realizing, oh my gosh, this is a disaster.
This is High Point, West Seattle?
Yeah, High Point in West Seattle.
That was, I mean, it's gotten better. Mm-hmm. But that was a sketchy place.
In the late 70s, dropping kids off and drug deals going on their porches.
Very poor neighborhood.
Their mom had no idea who the father was or who even was in the house that night. And it was absolutely a disaster. And so I began to, as I loved these kids, I couldn't help but try to understand their world and how they were living in this. And so that has been kind of the anchor and the prism that I've looked through things. It grew again as I really began to study theology, and in theology, seeing more and more of God's heart for the widow and the orphan. And for the poor, and began to understand that God's eyes views things through the lens of justice. Mm-hmm. And justice, by the way, is not, we've perverted our understanding of justice. Justice isn't just an issue of the poor. Justice is an issue of holding to that which is true about a person regardless of that person. So that can be about the poor. And oftentimes it is about the poor, and most of the time it is about the poor, but it isn't always that way. So So as I began to understand more and more of that really continued to drive the thinking and the prisms that I looked through kind of everything with. So going forward, that really has been the underlying framework of what motivates me to do whatever I do.
Huh. So, okay, I love that. So when you got out of school and you got married, did you go into college while in the early years of your marriage, or did you just immediately jump into business? Because I know you as a successful businessman. Give us a little definition of what happened in those sort of formative years, and how did your marriage withstand that? Because I'm sure there isn't a person listening that isn't considered marriage or is married and wonders how in the heck do you do it? And everybody needs help.
The first thing you do is you marry up. Yeah, so you get a wiser, smarter, and more prayerful person than you, and that's the way you really begin.
Right. Isn't that all men to women though in general?
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
We're always about 6-7 years behind as it is.
Yes, right? Exactly. So my wife and I were married in college, and then we went on Young Life staff for 7 years.
Here in Seattle as well.
In Seattle and then in Colorado.
Okay.
Then we came back.
Go Malibu.
Go Malibu. Go Malibu.
You guys got to check out Malibu. And if you don't know anything about it, just go on to Google and type Young Life Malibu, and you'll see what it's all about.
There you go. And then we left Young Life staff and moved back to Salem, Oregon, which was home, and got involved in the family business that we had. And that went to 1994.
Wow.
And at that point in time, we sold the business. At that time, we also found out that our youngest son, who is now 31 and lives and works in London, is very dyslexic.
Oh.
So my wife, being a former special ed teacher and very motivated around, obviously, how to help the kids with this, found a school up here in Seattle, Hamlin Robinson. We came up thinking we'd be here for just a couple of years. And during that time, we got drawn back into Young Life again.
Huh.
And so we volunteered as basically full-time volunteers for about 7 years. During that time, we also had a winery down in Oregon. And so I got deeply involved in the wine business and by running this winery from 2004 to the end of 2007, which kind of leads to the next phase here. In 2009, good friends came back from working on the Mercy Ship. And for those who don't know, the Mercy Ship is a hospital boat. And this particular one was parked in West Africa. So they go from Benin to Côte d'Ivoire to Liberia and travel around in these places. And they would go in and do operations for free on kids and, anybody.
Was it through the Red Cross? I can't remember if Mercy Ship
No, it's actually started by YWAM.
Okay.
And it is a standalone organization now. But it definitely is a faith-based organization.
Right.
So anyway, good friends had decided they were going to go and be on the Mercy Ship, and so they went and spent 18 months working on the Mercy Ship. And when they came back, Monty
devastated, right?
Yes, my buddy was really struggling with reverse culture shock, and he would struggle with the fact that his neighbors were ordering their designer dog food, and he'd be getting emails from friends over in Liberia saying that the family had not eaten for 3 weeks or for 3 days.
Right.
And if there's any way he could help. And this was really throwing his whole world completely off. So he would come over to my house for counseling. And I do almost all of my counseling with a bottle of wine. In fact, it's the only kind of counseling I know
you own the winery.
So,
this is 2009 or 2010?
This is 2009. This is August of 2009.
And what was your former winery?
Canis Feast.
Canis. That's an Oregon, like a Eugene?
Carlton area.
Carlton.
So just west of Portland.
Okay. Oh, gosh, I didn't know it was over there. So on the way to Tillamook and all that stuff. If you go on Highway 26, you keep going.
Yeah, and then you drop down from Highway 26. It's about maybe 40 minutes south of Highway 26 through some gorgeous countryside.
Okay.
It's a great area.
In the mountains there, with the coastal range there?
No, we were actually before you get to the coastal range. So we were right there in the north part of the Willamette Valley.
Okay. So in Oregon, that would be a pseudo sort of rain shadow, if you will, to that.
It is
right?
actually just a bit of a rain shadow
Helps
in that
with
area.
The growth of the
Yes,
grapes,
yes.
etc.
So for people that want to have a terrific 3 days out in the country, I strongly recommend going to Oregon wine country and enjoying the stunning beauty and the spectacular Pinot Noirs. And
of which you have one, which I want to talk about as well.
We do. Yeah. And so anyway, as my buddy Monty is sharing stories about orphans and what $1 would buy in Liberia, I drift off into Never Never Land, and I'm thinking, the wine business is way, way overbuilt, and nobody should put a dime into this business for at least 10 years, but people continue to do so. So there's way too much excess capacity. There's way too much fruit. There's way too much processing capacity. So I thought, we could make really solid value to world-class wines and never, ever have to own a brick or a stick. Therefore, our cost structure would be such that we can give a lot of money away. So
Wow.
I said, hey, Monty, I think proceeds from a glass of wine could feed one of those kids for a day. And that's how SOZO got started.
Wow.
And we thought it would just be SOZO, by the way, is a Greek word, means to save one from perishing.
You saved me from asking that question.
Yeah, there you go.
To save one from perishing.
Save one from perishing. So when we got started, we found that word, and in our focus group times with a lot of under 40-year-olds, they thought it was a really cool word.
Yeah.
And then we told them what it meant, and then they really liked it.
Yeah.
So it was pretty fun. So we started. We thought it'd be a little wine club, and proceeds of it would fund all these different orphanages. We thought we'd work with a lot of different small wineries, have them specialize in whatever they were good at, co-brand it, have it support an orphanage. But we ended up with a gal named Cheryl Jones as our winemaker, which has been absolutely wonderful. Cheryl was the winemaker at Chateau Saint Michel in the 80s and 90s.
Wow.
And
On their way up.
kind of got tired of the corporate scene, stepped out. She was doing some consulting. That's how we found her. And we said, hey, we'd love to make really solid value to world-class wines and feed a bunch of kids. Are you in? And she said, yes.
Wow.
That would be great. So we bottled up some wine, and we immediately were asked this question: how bad is your wine that you would have to guilt me into buying it with hungry kids?
Wow. That's a tough question. And a fair question.
Okay, it's a really fair question. I started laughing the first time. So it was a Monday that someone said that. And I started laughing because on Sunday at church, there had been this group from Honduras. It was an orphanage, and they had coffee, and they were trying to sell their coffee. And I took a sip of their coffee, and the cornea started peeling off my eyes. And I just went, oh, my gosh. And I went over to the guy, and I handed him a 20, and I said, here, take the 20. Please don't make me drink this.
Never give me coffee again.
So thought, well, there's a good way to deal with this. I loaded up our kit. I went up to Canlis, sat down with Nelson. He goes, these are really good wines. I'll take those 3.
And for those of you guys who don't know, Canlis is a world-class, true 5-star restaurant here in the Seattle area. One of the bad boys. Oh, is it a Michelin-rated restaurant? I'm assuming, maybe. One star?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Okay.
They are, without question, the premier wine restaurant on the West Coast.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary place.
Yes.
That if you come to the Seattle area, skip the Space Needle and go to Canlis. That's my
Without question.
That's my advice.
Without question.
So, pardon me for the interruption. I want to make sure people knew what Canlis was.
Yes. So we ended up in 90 restaurants, but we didn't tell people there was a cause. We just thought people shouldn't buy it because there's a cause. They should buy it because it's great wine.
Right.
So, and then we also entered it into the Los Angeles and the San Francisco wine competitions, which that and New York are the three most prestigious wine competitions. And we did really well, winning best of class, gold medals, and so forth. So we felt like it was very important to prove quality of the product before we did anything else. Our world really changed in 2011 when we brought a young guy on who had a friend who had just started at Mercedes-Benz in Seattle. And the general manager at Mercedes-Benz in Seattle had dinner up at Crush and had a bottle of our wine and heard the story behind it. And the next thing we knew, between these things coming together, this young sales guy and the general manager, we were making a gift box for Seattle Mercedes. And it was a beautiful gift box, and you'd open it up, and inside it would say, "Thank you for purchasing your Mercedes from Seattle Mercedes. We're grateful. Please accept this gift as an expression of our gratefulness. Proceeds from this gift will provide 25 meals to the Pike Place Food Bank." Well, the reports on it were amazing, the responses that people got. And so we began to realize we are on to something here, but we didn't really understand what it was. We realize now, and we'll come back to this, that what we were doing was tapping into oxytocin. And oxytocin is a chemical that is released in your brain. And one of the ways that it gets released is through expressions of generosity. The result of it is trust and loyalty. So it's a pretty fascinating thing. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But
I need to figure that out because I need more oxytocin.
Lots of.
I need to get people to excrete more oxytocin around me too.
Every time. Actually, it's kind of fascinating. You know, when you hug somebody and you have that sense of, that was nice. That actually is oxytocin being released in your brain.
Okay, so it's everything from trust to love to graciousness, all the good feelings.
Exactly. Oxytocin is often called the love chemical.
Okay.
So anyway. So we started rolling out. Now we have over 300 businesses that we serve with these gift boxes.
To date, currently?
Yeah, currently.
That's extraordinary.
So one of the things, though, that we began to notice was the marketplace does not differentiate between generous companies and non-generous companies.
So true.
Our first pondering on this actually came when we were working with Alaska Airlines to put our wine on their planes. And we met several times, and in the end, it just wasn't a good fit for us or for them at the time. But at the end of that gathering, of the third gathering, on my way out, I started talking with one of the guys there at marketing, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a shot. Next week, I fly down to San Diego, and I have not bought a ticket yet. So, based upon what you do to meet needs in this community, sell me on a ticket on Alaska Airlines versus Southwest." And the guy said, "Well, we're local."
Yeah.
I said, we know you're local. Everybody in Seattle knows Alaska Airlines is local, and we are grateful. Thanks for being here. You're a wonderful part of our community and lots of jobs, and
Absolutely.
You do wonderful things. That wasn't the question, though. The question is, based upon what you do to meet needs in our community, sell me. Why should I buy 17D on Alaska versus a seat on Southwest? And he said, "Well, we're very generous." I said, "I know you are. You guys gave away $28 million last year. That's a lot of money."
Yeah.
My question, though, is when someone is surfing the net, trying to buy a ticket, How much impact did that have on them? And he said, probably none.
Yeah.
I said, right. I think you're right. So here's why that really bothers me. You're a very generous company. And my experience with generous companies is that they're like generous people. All the generous people I know, when they make more, they give more. That's my observation of businesses too. If you made more money, would you all give more?
Yeah.
And he said, yes. I said, right. So by not leveraging your generosity, you're actually not maximizing how much you can give away.
Right.
And he said, I've never thought about it that way. I said, well, that's my first question. My second observation is this. What did your shareholders get for $28 million? Because it's their money you just gave away. And I'm not saying
I don't know if feel good is there.
Yeah. I'm not saying that they don't want you to give it away. I'm just asking the question. It's their money. And, maybe amongst all your shareholders, $28 million isn't a lot of money, but $28 million to me is a lot of money. So what did they get for it? And he goes, I don't know. So, and then he asked me, he said, so what's your solution? And I said, we don't have one, but we are really pondering on this. So we pondered on this for the next literally couple of years without coming up with anything that we felt was worthy or noteworthy anyway, until about a year ago. And a year ago, we were at a gathering, and we were introduced as SOZO, a generous company. And it really, really bothered us. Really bothered us. So it's kind of one of those bothering things when you're supposed to just start thinking about it.
Right. Like self-congratulatory, that sort of idea. Like, look at me. Here I am. I've arrived. I'm a generous man. Thank you for telling everybody how generous I am.
Well, no, actually, it was more like it's true. So why is this bothering me? And we didn't call ourselves out. Somebody else did it. It's like, this is true. Why is this bothering me?
Christian guilt?
No, it was, I would just say this for, as a follower of Jesus, when the Holy Spirit puts a burr under your saddle and you know that you just need to be pondering on this, that there's something here. About 2 weeks later, I'm driving along and I realize, I know why this bothers. I know why this is bothering me. We're not generous. Our customers are generous. If Lexus doesn't buy a gift box from us, if Audi doesn't buy a gift box, if Mercedes doesn't buy a gift box, if Guild doesn't buy a gift box, if whoever doesn't buy a gift box, if the State Farm agent doesn't buy a gift, we have nothing to give away.
Right. Yeah.
We're not generous. Our customers are generous.
Right.
And then began to ponder, we really have a lot of loyalty with our customers. That's kind of interesting. And then about 2 weeks later, all of a sudden it struck me, wait a minute, our customers aren't generous. Their customers are generous. If someone doesn't buy a Lexus or an Audi or a Mercedes or get a loan, or buy insurance, none of those people have any money to buy gift boxes with.
Right.
In fact,
let's go back farther.
Let's go back. Wait a minute. Then began to think, what would happen if we put our customer's customer, literally the source of the generosity, at the center of the story? Would they enjoy the same loyalty that we enjoy? So that was the first thing we began to ponder. Like, okay, maybe one of the reasons that generous businesses are not being rewarded for their generosity is they're not putting the source of the generosity at the center of the story. And there's this false pride that businesses have. And it exhibits itself when people say, I would never want to tell everybody all the good things that we're doing. Well, that would be accurate, and maybe it would be good if it were true that they were the source of the generosity. But they're not the source of the generosity.
Right.
And in fact, it is pride to not acknowledge the source of the generosity.
Right. They're the medium.
Yeah, they are.
They're writing, they're putting the pen in their hand and writing the check.
Right, exactly.
But it comes from somewhere else.
It comes from somewhere else. And so not to acknowledge that is, it'd be like if someone gave you a great meal to give to somebody else. And when you gave it to them, they said, you said, hey, don't tell anybody that I gave you this. That actually is, you could call that misleading.
Right.
Versus, I actually am not the source of this meal. You need to know that. Rob is the source of this meal. He's the guy that actually allowed me to do this. So if you're looking for someone to thank, go thank Rob Jones.
Right.
Because he's the source of this whole thing. Okay, now that's humility. That's actual humility.
Right.
And it's also empowering because it's not only true, so you're leaning on the truth, which actually frees people when you lean into the truth, but it also creates an opportunity for relationship.
It is. It's real agape love.
It is.
It's giving it all away. The hardest part, I mean, I know, and we can talk about this at length if you'd like, is the hardest part about being in any situation where generosity is involved is how much of it is heart driven and how much of it is purpose or ego driven, and not wanting to step across that line, but yet the human aspect of going, well, yeah, but if this is a God-focused thing, for example, God gave me these skills, and therefore, right, there's this weird thing. We like to mix ourselves in. Right. We like to put ourselves in the mix.
Yes.
We just like to do that.
Yes.
And culture, and even our very closest allies and friends and business partners and people who even align themselves with us in a number of ways, spiritually or whatever, will actually encourage us to do the same thing.
Yes.
Because, I mean, you got to be successful. I mean, this is the way it works.
Right.
And the answer is what if I were to disengage and keep disengaging and keep disengaging, at least in the sense of ownership, and only engage in the action of obedience? That's the hardest part.
Right.
I mean, I think that's definitely, to me, what you're getting at the heart of. But then there's this really intriguing thing that, and we don't have to go down the so to speak the biblical road here, but something I found in my podcast that really intriguing to me is always breaking part of that into it, right? And then there's this weird dynamic that says God loves a cheerful giver, but I don't recall where this is or isn't in the Bible. This could be something from my mom, for all I know. But that whole, if you tithe, for example, if you're giving money, you're not supposed to go like, "Look at me, I'm tithing."
Right.
You're just supposed to give it.
Right.
And so, to me, there's that dynamic in owning a business, or in my situation where I'm, I want to grow all of this that I'm doing to benefit other nonprofits. Right. I mean, I want to be the if you will, the funder behind other funders.
Right.
I want to be that guy. To me, I feel like I'm called to do that. And I don't necessarily know how to do that without talking about it. And at the same token, people could go, "Well, where's your faith?" I'm like, oh man, I'm caught in the middle. How am I supposed to figure this out? Because not everybody, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but not everybody is supposed to be quiet. Some people are kind of called to be right, the voices of a people, right? The thing that's interesting, and I'm sorry, I'll let you get back on your topic, Martin, is when I think about what SOZO's doing in regards to funding, taking care of the poor, and I want you to break that down for us. Is how do I want to say this? Is how much of it? Well, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to keep going. I know I could keep going down this road, but I know you're going to answer the question by we're just going to talk about it. I think it's safer. So I'm sorry. Sorry, listeners. You're going to have to deal with me pulling the rug out from under you just now. We're gonna continue here because I realize I'm talking too much and my guest isn't getting a chance to tell his story. So if you can remember where we were. I just get on a soapbox and I feel compelled to share it,
Sure. Well, picking up a little bit, the kingdom and the entire universe, when it's functioning properly, are profoundly other-centered.
Yeah.
So you're always looking to acknowledge the other person and to particularly acknowledge gifts and kindness and the source of all that is good, that is a profoundly kingdom understanding. And when we live that out, it's extraordinarily powerful because the whole universe is built around that understanding or that character of being other-centered. So we're really tapping into something that is in line with the whole structure of how creation has happened.
Yeah. I would say something, though. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Mm-hmm. The hardest part for a lot of my listeners are going to be they don't believe in any of this, right? Mm-hmm. So where do you take that? You know, do you just continue, or is there a way to cross over that line?
Well, I would say that almost everybody here, if they're willing to reflect, acknowledge the fact that the most fulfilling times of their life has been when they've been other-centered.
Yeah.
When they have actually looked to someone else's needs before their own. Most people that are miserable are completely self-absorbed.
Yeah.
They think about themselves constantly. Everything is about how it affects them. The idea that they are at a place to serve and to help doesn't necessarily cross their mind. But for most people, at least at some point in their life, they have done something that's been an other-centered act. And most people will say, that could have been one of the most rich experiences of my life. Right. Unfortunately, all too often, we go back to self-centered rather than other-centered ways of looking at it. And then we're confused because we think we are the source of things. And we are not the source. None of us are the source of something. We have everything I have ever have in my life. Everything I have in my life, I have received. Mm-hmm. Period. I mean, I received an education. You know, yeah. I have received love. I have received friends. I have received everything that I have.
You were born in America.
I was born. I've received. And so for many of us, we've received crazy amounts, but we are not the source of any of that. And what's interesting is that's where so much joy is. When you realize you received it, then it no longer owns you because it's no longer your identity. You're not living with the false idea that somehow I made this, I did this, therefore I have a right to it. The truth of the matter is anything that you possesses you.
Yeah.
So when you're free from that, there's just great freedom in life.
Yeah.
But we can go down that on another time. But anyway.
I got all the time in the world, buddy.
So we realized
Part 5.
three reasons why our understanding, I should say, is that there are 3 reasons why companies are not rewarded for their generosity. And why you can take 2 companies with you can take 2 auto dealers, they have the same brand, they're selling the exact same cars, they can both have brand new showrooms, they can have everything else. One is genuinely generous, one is not. The marketplace looks at them exactly the same way. So the first reason is the generous one is saddled with this false sense of if you want to call it humility or control, because they do not recognize that the source is the customer. They are all wrapped up and are not able to include the customer in the generosity experience because they think somehow it's theirs and therefore they get to make all the decisions by themselves, and it excludes the source of the generosity. Second reason is they don't necessarily create alignment between the source of the generosity through the business to a social outcome that both the source and the company care about. And this is important. You know, alignment doesn't happen with a single data point. You have to have 2 data points to create alignment. So it isn't just a matter of what does the company care about or just what does their customer care about. You want to bring alignment between those 2, because when people realize that you have alignment around those issues, it creates trust because it's an understanding of value.
Yeah.
So we began to see this because we would have people, companies give away a gift box, and you would open it up, and it would say, "Thank you so much for purchasing your Lexus or purchasing this mortgage or whatever it is. Please enjoy this gift box as an expression of our thanks, proceeds of which will provide a day of college for a girl safe from trafficking, or a safe night for a kid off the street, or family counseling materials for a returning veteran and his family, or whatever it might be. All of those are compelling. I mean, every one of those that they were opening up were really good, but it didn't necessarily resonate with everybody. So we wanted to help create alignment, because in that alignment between the business and the source, when you align it with something both care about deeply, you create a shared value experience. And shared values create trust. So we realized that's the second reason. They're not creating alignment between the source and the social outcome that they both care about. And then the third is they don't create a positive link. So there's, we think of boycotts. I'm not going to buy something because so-and-so company is involved with whatever, and I disagree with that. Most businesses don't think pro-cots. They don't think of it in terms of, how do I tie our customers' economic patterns, how much they're spending their money, where they're spending their money, and have them begin to think about positive outcomes they care about. So they're going to decide not to spend money someplace because they don't want an outcome. There has to be a deliberate linkage between where the source spends their money and things that they care about being solved in the community. So those are the three things that we really focused on.
But you know what? This is business 101, but broken down into your space, right? Well, I should say not so much broken down in your space, but broken down into your discoveries.
Yes.
Because when you get down to it, I imagine, and I'm sure maybe you were going to touch on this, is one of the other factors that people said to you across the board is, look, Martin, the reality is I like your wine, right? If you can present the most heartfelt, right? I mean, completely egoless, beautiful, the agenda of a lifetime, the legacy of a lifetime. But if it's not partnered up and aligned with a great product that people will buy or that need, where either that dream doesn't go anywhere, it just sits there and spins around or percolates for the rest of their life. Right. So you have made some extraordinary wines.
Well, we actually have. We have some really extraordinary wines, and
I'm not a shill for wine.
Pardon?
We've talked about that. I'm not a shill for wine.
No.
Not even kinda. But I have had all of your wines, and I will say the Pinot is
the Pinot's fabulous.
Is just crazy nuts good.
Yeah.
And I told my wife, I said, I hope Martin brought a bottle, because I'm going to buy a bottle because I want to bring it home so she can see, because it's so good.
We'll have to do that another time.
Okay, dang it! I was hoping I was going to get lucky. Yeah.
No, it is really interesting when someone made the comment, "How bad is your wine?" You'd have to guilt me into buying Hungry Kids. I was offended by that because in Oregon, our winery is the 2005 Oregon Winery of the Year.
Yeah, kind of a big
So I'm
deal.
like, it's kind of a big thing. I'm thinking, wait a minute. I would never associate myself with bad wine. So I was personally offended.
But that's you knowing you.
Yes. Monty, on the other hand, my business partner, the one that was on the Mercy ship, he was offended for a far more righteous reason. And his reason was, that's offensive to me. Why do people think it's okay to give something other than your best when you're caring for the poor? Which I'm thinking, see, just like you always marry up, you always do the same thing. You always partner up to a higher level when you do a business venture. So Monty's way better than me.
That's so true.
He's thinking his offense was actually worthy of being offended. Mine was totally petty. So anyway, yes. So wine, creating great wines, we work with Cafe Lusso, who, we live in the land of some really great coffee, and we have some of the best coffee roasters anywhere in the world here. And the best, as far as I'm concerned, is Phil Meach at Cafe Lusso.
Yeah.
So when we were putting together the gift boxes, we went and found the best, and it turned out to be Phil Meach. So,
wow.
So we're really big. And actually, I was into coffee way before I was into wine.
Okay.
So when I was in high school, I spent a summer down in Ecuador.
Okay.
In a fairly poor moderate family. And but every morning, this was great. Every morning, Maria would turn on the burner. We just had like a little hot stove, 2 burners, propane tank heating it, and she would throw some beans onto a skillet, and then she would roast the beans up, and then she would grind the beans, make the coffee. And so here I am in high school. I'm thinking, oh, I love coffee. This is great. So then I came back, and the only thing we had back then was Folgers and MJB and oh my gosh,
U-Ban.
Oh, U-Ban. Oh my gosh.
And then of course the
Maxwell
House.
Maxwell House Sanka.
Yeah, Sanka. That's the one.
I mean, none of that stuff was coffee. It was just
brown water.
Oh, it was
hot
absolutely
brown water.
Terrible. So that sent me on a quest to find good coffee, and so for a while I would get green beans and roast them myself because I couldn't find any place that had decent coffee and then, of course, now with all the great roasters out there, especially with Phil, the last thing I'd ever do is lay my amateurness over his professionalism. So anyway, so that is just a plug for Cafe Luso. If anybody's looking for the best coffee in Seattle,
I have to
country.
zip my lip on this. Yeah. I don't disagree with you. I just have a whole bunch of friends who are roasters. And I know they all listen to this podcast. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say here because I have 3 friends that own coffee roasters.
Well, there's a lot of good coffee.
There's a lot of good coffee. That's a good answer.
And the way that I would describe it is there's also a lot of bad coffee in Seattle too.
Yes.
I'll say that. And it's actually easier still, unfortunately, to find bad coffee than it is to find good coffee. But there are a lot of really good roasters, and we live in a pretty elite area where you can find it. And it's a little bit at times like trying to say who is the best golfer in the world or something. It's like, well, there's probably about 10 guys that could vie for that position. Well, why do you think this guy is? Because I just think he is.
Yeah. It's interesting though. Gary Vaynerchuk, who owns wine, what's it called? Do you remember?
Yes. Yeah.
Wine Society I can't remember what it's called.
Yes. He has the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long story short he's an acquired taste. Not everybody likes him. That's for certain.
Yes.
But he said something really interesting about wine recently. He said, I'm really tired of being a wine guy. And he goes, and I would like to even think I'm a wine connoisseur. But he said, what I'm tired of is the guy that tells me who needs to be able to tell you that what I noticed was the hint of oak, the hint of cherry, the hint of burlap, whatever it was, to sort of demonstrate his skills as an aficionado / snob or whatever.
Yes.
But the thing was that ultimately when you get down to it, whether you like a 1962 cab from some, whatever, European whatever, to $2 Chuck, your taste is your taste is your taste. Right. And that is the struggle because I say this a lot. People are path of least resistance, right? I mean, we all are. We don't want to admit it. And there's a reason companies, and I'm not going to go down the Starbucks road, but there's a reason companies like Starbucks are so hyper successful, even when there are, to my palate, significantly, far superior flavors out there that are readily available, and even in franchise form.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What's the struggle on the wine side? Clearly there is. How do you maintain an identity when the world is full of snobs without dissing people? Because I love people, but how do you deal with that?
Well, wine is a very subjective thing.
Yeah.
So first of all, what you find in the wine business is people say, "Oh, that's a bad wine." And a lot of people aren't able to differentiate between their own preference in wine and a bad wine.
Right.
So as an example, I am not a fan of California wines. I do not like what I consider to be over-the-top, jammy fruit with way too much oak. Now, I'm not saying those are not well-crafted wines.
Okay.
I can taste those wines and say that is really a well-crafted wine. It's not my style.
Okay.
It's not my style of wine. I would not drink that. I wouldn't buy that bottle. It wouldn't make any difference to me what the price is. The fact that it may be really expensive and people will come. Often have somebody will bring some bottle of wine that they are just so excited about. And it's a $180 bottle of California Cabernet. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel bad because I'm kind of going, I know that that's a well-crafted wine, but I don't necessarily like that kind of a wine.
Right.
I like a wine that's a French wine or an Italian wine line, Spanish wines, much more elegant wines. I think Oregon Pinot is fabulous, especially the Oregon Pinots that did not try to chase the big jammy oak that many did during what I would call the Parker years and the Wine Spectator years, when the bigger it was, the more oak it had. Somehow that made it a better wine.
Right. It's right up there with a perfume that smells like grapes.
Yeah.
It's big and almost brash.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily that it's the opposite of subtle, whatever that word would be, but it's also so potent and powerful that it's overwhelming. And me, especially not being a wine connoisseur, can tell the difference between what I would call almost a subversive wine.
Yes.
I love the idea of a wine that sneaks up on you, not one that goes, hello.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And I wouldn't necessarily know the difference because I don't drink enough wines, but have you ever blindfold taste tested yourself and said, oh man, I mean, this is a California all the way. You just know because how it's produced.
Yes.
That's crazy.
And you can do, we used to do this on a much more frequent basis when, as the rating system really took hold in the 80s and 90s and the early millennium, and we started seeing this rating inflation with scores going, into the 97, 98s, 99s, and then people actually getting hundreds. We would acquire many of those bottles.
And hundreds out of 100?
Yeah, 100 out of 100.
Okay.
Which by definition is a little interesting. Like, how do you actually have a perfect wine?
Right. That seems absurd to me.
It kind of is, and it's absurd to a lot of people, but it's this whole, as we talked about, rating inflation systems. So anyway, we would get, 10 or 12 bottles, and a couple of them would be these 97, 98s, even hundreds. And we would get a bunch of winemakers together, and we would brown bag a whole bunch of wines. So everybody would – we would get a hold of those, and then everybody would bring a really solid wine. All of them needed to be over $50. Okay. And all of them needed to have been rated.
Okay.
So we tried to create some sense of apples to apples in the whole thing. So we would go through, and now these are serious wine people, and we would do blind tastings. And there was not a single time when a wine that was rated above, I think, about a 97 ever finished in the top 5.
Interesting.
So, and why? It's not that those wines were not well-crafted wines. They received a perfect 100 because there was one person who felt like, to that person, it was their perfect wine.
Oh, I see.
They just happened to have a magazine or some sort of blog or something that people were reading. It's like, well, I'm glad you think that's the perfect wine. I don't even think it's close. I can list a whole bunch of other wines that I think are way better than that wine. Now, you may not think that's true.
Right.
But at the same time, where you get what I would call the immaturity in the process is when someone says, that's a bad wine. No, that's not a bad wine. I would never say that these wines that have ranked high are bad wines. I'm saying they're crafted in a way that I don't appreciate them.
Understood.
And so that's where it's kind of interesting to me. So people drive towards, thinking that they have to have the perfect wine or what everybody else has. So.
And we had to take a short break there because Uncle Rob needed to use the facilities.
Oh my!
And we're back. So I have to admit, Martin, I I'm not sure where we left off. I'm the king of zeroing out the moment a sentence ends. I would call it just general dyslexia. I mean, just life dyslexia. I just get lost. But we were talking about points and scoring with wines, and see, look at me, I'm good.
There you go.
And how it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But I'm curious, how personally do you take that? Because I would think that when you see on whatever rating sites there are, when you see SOZO Wines on there, it's your baby. I mean, I imagine you're saying, "Hey, that blend rocks. What's wrong with you?" Do you do that? Do you ever find yourself saying, "Nah, you're wrong"?
Well, we have not submitted our wines to many of the scoring type organizations. Okay. We've done it mostly in competitions because we think they're much truer. Usually, if you look at something like the Los Angeles Wine Competition, well, they have 100 qualified sommeliers tasting the wine. And in order to get a gold or a silver or a bronze, you have to have a certain rating amongst a whole bunch of different people. And in many of these places, one of the things I like about them is they do a much better job of telling people to check their preferences at the door.
Okay.
So as an example, Cheryl Jones our winemaker, has been a judge in many of these. And they're very clear. You're not here to judge whether you like the wine. You're here to judge whether or not you think this is a well-crafted wine. Is it true to the variety? Are the acids and the qualities of the wine imbalanced? Does it have the right flavor profile? Did the winemaker do a good job of pulling out all the positive qualities in this particular vintage with this particular variety? So those are much better ways than having one person who somehow is supposed to be the king. And I know people, as an example, who love Robert Parker's palate.
Okay.
And if Robert Parker gives them a high score, they're going to buy it.
I don't know who Robert Parker is.
So Robert Parker was considered, many people either say he's the greatest thing that happened to wine in the United States, or he's the worst thing that happened to wine in the United States.
Wine critic, a sommelier, what is he?
No, it's called the Advocate, Wine Advocate.
Okay.
And he started this, was basically a newsletter that grew into a publication, and people would subscribe to it. I had friends that the moment it would come out, they would go buy every wine that was rated above a 95. I had a couple of friends who were literally had a business that as soon as it came out, they would go buy all these different wines for other people who would say, "I don't have time to go get them. You just go find them for me." I, on the other hand, as soon as I saw Robert Parker gave it a 90 or above, would say, "I'm not interested in that wine at all. There's no way I'll like it."
Huh.
Again, it's not that it's a bad wine.
Right. Just comparatively.
I prefer wines that are elegant, wines that go better with food, wines that I think are much more balanced, wines that have brighter fruit, that have more acidity to it, wines that aren't, in my mind, don't at times feel like they just run together in terms of their qualities because they're all just so big and they're all so jammy and they all have so much oak. So, those are the kinds of wines that I lean into. Therefore, Oregon wines in Washington, Yakima Valley and Horse Heaven Hills and Red Mountain, they tend to be more of those kinds of wines as well. And those are really well-crafted wines. And, Oregon and Washington, I would submit, is we happen to live in the greatest wine-growing region in the entire world. If you look at the percentage of Oregon and Washington, if you combine it together, we are something like 1/2 of 1% of all the wine that's produced in the world. And however, it is rare, and again, this is where I would say it's an interesting thing. If you look at across the board at, say, 5 or 6 of the leading publications, it is rare that Oregon and Washington don't have upwards of 10 or more in the top 100 wines of the world every year.
Really?
Yeah. So when you look at it, you think we are a small we are a small area, but we way outperform when it comes to quality. So I believe that we happen to live in the best wine area in the entire world.
Okay, so like, is it in France, the Champagne Valley? And that, of course, is where the whole name Champagne comes from. It's like Kleenex, right? It becomes this sort of thing, ubiquitous thing.
Right.
Is there that sort of understanding around the world that they say, oh, these are, Yakima Valley? I mean, is there such a place as a location like, the Washington wine, right? They just say this is a Washingtonian wine, or this tastes like a Washingtonian wine. Do they think like that outside of here, or is this more or less your personal just thoughts on our growing area?
Well, I would say this. We probably drink a lot more European wines in the U.S. than the average European drinks of U.S. wines.
Okay.
So we're probably more familiar with the flavor profiles of Europe than Europeans are aware of the flavor profiles of the United States. Part because, especially Oregon and Washington, we're such a small percentage. Most of it doesn't make it outside of, in the case of Oregon as an example, so much of the great Oregon Pinot is made by small producers who are making, anywhere between 500 and say 3,000 cases of wine a year. A lot of that stuff doesn't make it more than 150 miles from the winery. I mean, it's probably 80 to 90% of it is consumed by purchasers within 100 to 150 miles of that winery, much less, Rome or Paris or Berlin or any other place like that. They've probably never tasted an Oregon Pinot, whereas most people here have tasted Burgundy as an example.
Right.
So we're still such a small piece of that how the rest of the world looks at it is a little difficult to know. But if you look at the leading publications, those people are drinking wines from all over the world.
Right. It's the nose, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So I've noticed that there's an uptick, again, even not being a big wine connoisseur, but there's a significant uptick in celebrity winemakers or at least ownership of various wine vineyards, etc. You have Kyle MacLachlan doing Pursuit by Bear over in, I think, Walla Walla. You got I'm just thinking of local celebs, granted, but you have the guy from Queensryche, Jeff Tate. I can't remember. He has some heavy metal wine, and granted, I mean, he lived in Duval. I don't know where these guys are growing or if they're doing something similar to you, because I don't understand what I don't understand about your thing. So that's where this is leading is. Are you, in a sense, buying the rights to buy from various crops and then create your own blends? Is that how it works? I mean, I don't really understand how wine in general is made if you don't own your own thing and you're basically there's somebody out back stomping around in a big barrel.
Right.
I mean, I don't really understand how wine is made today.
Right.
Can you share a little bit on that?
Well, wine today is made obviously quite similar to how wine has been made for thousands of years. Our particular model is somewhat different, although it's not brand new. What our model has been a part of what the French have done for a couple hundred years. They would call it a négociant.
Okay.
So, and it was very popular in Burgundy and still is. And Champagne, since you mentioned that, is also a place that typically did a lot of négociant type things. So, a négociant in France is someone who doesn't own any vineyard land and who brings together various grapes or various wines, juice. It can be the grapes, could be the juice, blends those things, bottles them under their name, and then actually, sells it. So that's very similar to what we do. So we have partnerships with what we would call our workhorse wines. So our workhorse wines would be Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Cabernet. So we work with various producers that we really enjoy working with. So as an example, our partnership down in Oregon is with Lang.
Okay, I didn't know if this is sort of public information. I want to make sure you can
absolutely.
share. You know what I mean?
So Lang was the 2013 winery of the year across the country. I mean, the whole country. They are really great folks. I got to know the Langs when we were down in Oregon and had our winery down there, and they are absolutely terrific people. And one of the things that we enjoyed about partnering with them is that Jesse, who is second generation and the winemaker, is a terrific guy, and he's very humble. Cheryl, our winemaker, is very humble. So they work together very, very well. So the Langs have quite a bit of acreage. And so when we approached them, we said we would love to be able to be in partnership with you, Cheryl, and have Cheryl and you, Jesse, create Pinot Noirs for us.
Right.
So Cheryl will, and I, this is one of, there are certain things in your work that you just hate. Probably at the top of the list for me is when Cheryl and I have to go down to Oregon and taste through barrel samples.
Must be terrible.
It's brutal. You have no idea.
Actually, you're probably not. You're not being facetious. You're probably like, I don't know, man. I've had an awful lot of wine in my life, kind of burned out.
No, I absolutely love it. It's very fun. And then after tasting them, we began to put together little blends. And I don't usually say a lot. My grandfather had a great statement. He said, it's better to keep your mouth closed and have people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. So when I'm in the midst of greatness like Cheryl and Jesse, I prefer to listen a lot. As much as I have experienced with wine and am pretty serious about it, I really respect professionals, and they're professionals. I'm not. So we'll go through the blending, then we'll bring some things back. Cheryl will work in her lab. She'll try a little bit more blending. She might get some more samples sent up from Jesse down at Lang. She'll do a few things to it that she might want to try. They come up together with a formula that they want, whatever that Pinot is for us. And then Jesse will blend it all up for us. And then we bottle it down at Lang. And so it's pretty simple. I mean, by the time it comes to our warehouse, it's bottled.
Okay. So the name of the Pinot again is?
Well, it's Lang. Oh, the name, we call it Potential. Ours is Potential.
That's
so
right.
We have Potential, and then we have a Reserve Potential. And it's kind of fun. The names of the wines were picked out actually by Cheryl and mostly my wife. And, it all comes down to, we have generosity as a wine, we have abundance as a wine, bountiful, potential, cherished, contribute, all these different things, around it. So we do that with a couple other wineries. We actually work with Sarah and Hedges, over at Hedges, Winery. And because in large part, Sarah and Cheryl they just work so well together. Again, Sarah is a really humble, very knowledgeable, very skilled. So when you put two highly skilled people together like Sarah and Cheryl, who are both very humble, and therefore they're willing to work and learn from one another, and they appreciate each other.
Yeah.
It's truly amazing. It is. And what's different is this model would not have worked 15 years ago because the glut wasn't sufficient in the marketplace. Today, the glut is so high that we're able to pick through oftentimes and get really, really good fruit out of all that.
And meaning the glut that there's just so much fruit being produced.
Yes.
Right? That's what
Yes.
you mean. Okay.
There is. And I'll give you an idea. In 1980, there were 50 wineries in the state of Washington, and there were 100 distributors.
Okay.
Today, it depends on who's counting. There's about 900-ish plus wineries in the state of Washington.
Wow.
Oh, by the way, I think the last count I saw was 475 microbreweries, and just in the Seattle city limits, because I don't know what the state statistics are, but just in the Seattle city limits, there's over 50 distilleries.
That's crazy.
All trying to go through 50 distributors.
Wow.
Now, remember, too, this explosion since 1980 has happened worldwide. Look at the Australians and the New Zealanders, the Kiwis. Argentina wasn't a player in 1980. Look at all the wine they're sending up. Mm-hmm. Chile was not a player. All the wine that they're sending. France has planted more. Italy's planted more. Portugal has really come on strong. Spain has planted more. Now we're getting wines. We're starting to see wines come from Eastern Europe, which most people don't know. Prior to World War II, if you go back to the 19th century, some of the greatest wines that were made were in Bulgaria and places like that. But then through the wars and then through communism and everything else, they all got trashed. So now we're seeing a revival in some of these other places, not to mention, South Africa.
Right.
And so you have this huge glut of product trying to get through to the marketplace. And even though the market has grown roughly about 7% per year compounded, which that's a good marketplace growth. Any industry would take 7% growth compounded yearly for 50 years.
Right.
That would be a great market growth. The supply has actually exceeded that. In fact, I talked with a guy who this was 2 years ago, had just come back from working in Australia, helping them with crush, was at a large plant where they were basically filling things, juice for like yellowtail and so forth. They were hooking up hoses to 100,000 liter tanks.
Hoses.
And they were taking and just opening them up and dumping it into the field.
What?
Because, as they said, what's the point?
Yeah.
First lost, best lost. Why bottle it? We can't sell it.
That's madness.
There's so much excess capacity. So all we're going to do is add cost to this.
Right.
And then when we add cost, by bottling it and so forth,
right.
And then we got to ship it and why? So, it gives you an idea. It's pretty crazy right now in terms of some of the excess capacity out there.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I understand the real estate business really well, for example, and one of the reasons we have a propped up real estate market is because the government has kept a lot of the distressed properties off market. Mm-hmm. That allows the prices to stay up. They bolster the market. Mm-hmm. Is that part of it? That if you were to release it, all of a sudden prices are down or they don't grow, and then people are like, "Where's our profitability?" Because we're diluting our market space.
Well, that would be what's interesting, and part of what you brought up in terms of the government. Part of the struggle in the wine business is what's called the 3-tier system, which goes back to Prohibition days, where you're supposed to have a producer, a distributor, and a retailer, and none of them can be, quote, owned by each other. That 3-tier system, like all regulation, in the end ends up by favoring the big people, and it crushes the little people.
Sure.
Regulation always crushes the little guy.
Right. No collusion, but it's colluded.
Yes, exactly. So you
right.
basically have Constellation. You have the Budweisers, the Millers, these other people that control the distribution network. They own the grocery store shelves and so forth. So what it does is it crushes the little guy and keeps the little guy out. So all the regulations and everything. So the government has truly warped the system out there. And anytime there's a warp and you start building regulations lobbied for by the big guys, you end up with a system that is much more difficult for the average guy out there. So the small winemaker that is maybe making 500 to 3,000 cases a year produces some of the greatest wine in our state. They can't get it to the marketplace.
Yeah, yeah.
Because what distributor wants to carry it? Their book of of Washington Cabernets or Merlots or whatever it is out there, Syrahs, it's so thick that unless you win the world wine for the greatest wine of the world for the whole year, nobody cares. So anyway, so that's part of the problem, is that we have a system that has been pretty warped.
Okay. So one thing I was always curious about, and I didn't know if you had time to touch on it today, but it's a vintage question. All my life I've heard, you have this one group of people and they act like they know, right? Which says that, well, what you want is an even year wine. And then, right? And then what you want is an odd year wine. So you don't want to buy the 2012, you want to go to the 2011, right? And so I never really understood why they say that outside of just ignorance, which I'm assuming it's just that. But what I'm really curious about vintage is when you have something like potential, what your Pinot, right? What I find fascinating, and maybe is a better way to put it, is how do you maintain similarity of taste from year to year? Because, grapes are grapes. And I mean, I've eaten a lot of mushrooms as an example, and I don't mean the psychedelic kind, but I can tell, I can't tell much difference unless I eat really, really pungent mushrooms as an example, right? Certain kinds of shiitake mushrooms compared to, say, this just regular white cap over here.
Button.
Right, exactly. So how do you maintain a flavor profile? Do you is it human tested only? Is it machine tested? And then you go for acidity, or what is the thing? How do you figure that out?
Well, a great winemaker like Cheryl is able to create a very similar profile.
Okay.
And part of it obviously begins in the vineyard, and the vineyard practices need to be consistent and disciplined. How much is being cropped? A good vineyard keeper will know the grapes very well, watch the heat, how many heat units have been coming through, all the different aspects that say how fast is this ripening, and they'll drop fruit. If it's an exceptionally cool year maybe, or if it was late getting started, or if there's concern that maybe the harvest might need to come in early. So they will manage the crop levels in any vineyard to try to get a similar profile on the other end. So when they harvest, then it's up to the winemaker to do some things. And how long, as an example, you might cold soak it if you cold soak it. How long you would what kind of yeast you use can have an impact on that. Is it whole cluster, or is it completely crushed, or is it part?
Too many variables.
Yeah, there's so many different things in that. But most winemakers are striving to try to keep it so that it's very consistent.
Cool. So you guys don't know this, but we had to move rooms. Long story short, we had space for 90 minutes, and man, we took it. So we had to move, and now we're in this space with fan noise in the background. So if you wonder what the change in background noise or lack of background noise is, well, that's because we had to move to a new location. So we are completely off
the radar.
Yeah, off the radar, off of our mojo right now. So we're going to get back into it here, but Martin has another 15 or so minutes, and I wanted to ask him what he has yet to share with us today. So he had mentioned World Changers, and so if you want to share with our audience what World Changers is and why it matters.
Yes. So last year, American corporations gave away $28.64 billion, which is a lot of money. 26 billion here and 26 billion there, and pretty soon you got some money. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. You think?
However, last year, American corporations spent over $300 billion in advertising. Now, what's fascinating about that is that almost all of the advertising is trying to extract and get movement in the brain around dopamine, which is a chemical. Think of dopamine is the consumer chemical. It is what a business is trying to get you to do to want to desire their product. So it's very much focused on trying to sell you competency, trying to sell you product, features, benefits, and those kinds of things. It does nothing to build trust. So dopamine is a pretty fascinating chemical in your brain, in that one of the ways that you see it used a lot is through ads. If you see an ad that is in essence trying to sell sex, all they're trying to do is trip dopamine off in your head.
And they do.
And they do.
Yeah.
And they do. Here's the problem with it. It is very short-lived. It's like any narcotic. It takes more next time to get the same rush.
Yeah.
And it does nothing to actually build loyalty or trust.
Yeah.
So there is a place, by the way, for dopamine in any sophisticated marketing program. You do want to communicate your product. You do want to communicate competency. You do want to communicate features and benefits and those kinds of things. But the truth of the matter is most businesses are dealing in a commodity type situation. I mean, let's look at cars.
Okay.
Not only is a car, a lot of cars very, very similar. And I know that there are people that are absolutely loyal to their specific brand. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at most high-end cars, as an example, what you find on a Mercedes, you find on a BMW.
Yeah.
And what you find on an Infiniti, you find on a Lexus. And so these cars, there's so much parity in the marketplace that trying to just compete around product, features, seeking to give the perception of competency. Every mortgage company, every real estate company, every insurance broker is all trying to project competency. But most of us assume that when you have your real estate license, you're competent. So it's really difficult to try to create an edge or some sort of differentiation. But for most of the marketplace, it's all they know on how to communicate to their customers. So they just keep beating people with dopamine, thinking that somehow this is going to create loyalty and trust. But it doesn't work. The loyalty and the trust mechanism is actually triggered through what we talked about before, oxytocin. And oxytocin is actually tripped through shared generosity. So any sophisticated marketing program now needs to understand where their customer is in the life cycle. There is definitely a time. As an example, let's just use a mortgage broker as an example. Once you get a loan, if you're in the market looking for a loan, knowing that this is a competent mortgage broker, knowing the products and the services they may have, is actually quite important to you. After you have your loan, how important is it to you for that person to send you a notice telling you that interest rates have changed 20 basis points? You don't care.
Yeah.
They can send you ad nauseum various new products they have in terms of, well, you could structure your loan this week. You don't care. Yeah. You are locked in. In fact, at some point in time, peddling dopamine becomes a negative thing because pretty soon you're like many people, you just turn it all off. You unsubscribe, you block it, you don't want anything to do with it anymore. But most of the time a company goes, but what else do you do? I have to stay in front of my customer. I mean, at some point in time in the cycle, whether it's 3 years or 7 years or 10 years, they're going to be back and they're going to need another mortgage. They're either going to want to change their mortgage, they're going to buy another house, they're going to trade up, they're going to trade down, but they're going to need some sort of mortgage service. I want to be the person that they come back to. So a sophisticated marketing program recognizes that you want to build loyalty between the economic events. So they're no longer in the market to buy a mortgage.
Right.
You want to stay in front of them.
Nothing to gain from it.
Exactly. So you use dopamine. Use oxytocin.
All right.
Yeah,
sex,
more dopamine.
more
See, there you go. You use oxytocin at that point in time to continue to build trust so that you are the person they come back to at the top of the list. They do trust you. And so the way that you do that is you begin to create shared generosity experiences. So you communicate to them something like this. If I were a mortgage company, I would be sending out an email to everybody who's a part of my circle of success. So that could be realtors, that could be appraisers, that could be title companies, that could be whatever, which is, by the way, a fun thing since we're in mortgage, which is a very regulated business. Dopamine is a regulated drug. In other words, you have to be very careful what you make claim-wise in terms of what your product, what your services, what your competency, and all those other kinds of things. And in some businesses like investments, you can't even tell people how good your product is. I mean, it's like, oh, you can't touch it. Anything around dopamine is a regulated drug.
Yeah.
Oxytocin is an unregulated drug because when you send this email, so if I send it out and I say, and you, Rob, get an email and it says, Rob, thank you so much for being a part of Martin Barrett's Circle of Success. Mm-hmm. Because you have been a faithful customer, referral partner, whoever it might be, however it fits into my circle of success, because you have done that, funds have been generated that we can use in order to meet important needs in our community. Because you, Rob, were literally the source of those funds, we would like you to be a part of giving those to somebody, something that we agree is important. So please click here to direct funds from Martin Barrett to whatever this. You click, it goes to 4 options that you're given. So it could be a day of college for a girl safe from trafficking. It could be a safe night for a kid off the street. It could be counseling for a veteran and his family returning from the front, whatever it might be. So you are now going to draw someone into this shared generosity experience. So now, instead of using marketing dollars to continue to hammer somebody on what the interest rate change has been, you're now saying, be a part of a generosity experience. It breeds trust. So what we do with World Changers is we set companies up. This actually resides on their platform. It's a part of their webpage. Instead of having those really dorky, what I consider dorky, corporate social responsibility pages that nobody goes to, by the way,
right,
because all they do is talk about the business.
They just don't want to get sued later.
Yeah, whatever it is. Companies spend money on it because they know they have to, but they all hate it. Mm-hmm. They just hate these corporate social responsibility pages because it's not positive. This becomes your new corporate social responsibility page, but it's positive. It's a whole list of your customers with their quote saying, thank you for letting me be a part of this. You know, I choose to have funds go to water, you know, to provide a family with water the rest of their life, type, whatever it might be. And this is why it's important, because I was in the Peace Corps and I did whatever it might be. And then the other fun thing we do is we have a scoreboard. So it literally keeps track of how many days of college has this company and their customers provided for girls safe from trafficking? How many safe nights have they done? How many back to school kits have they provided? How many, whatever it is. And so it becomes this very fun, positive way of engaging customers on an ongoing basis. So what we do with World Changers is we're working with companies saying, of course you're going to talk about your product, but if you do not have oxytocin in your marketing plan, you are totally missing out on the ability to build loyalty, because all the dopamine in the world will never build loyalty and it will never build trust with your customers. That's what we want to do. So bringing it all back, think of this, because we started out with the idea that, at least for me, my heart is for the poor. What would happen if instead of $28.64 billion being given to nonprofits, what would happen and $300 million being used for dopamine? What would happen if $28.6 billion were being used for dopamine and the rest was oxytocin-based marketing that actually solved problems for the poor? And what's really fun now is we're seeing a convergence of two things. We are seeing a convergence where actually meeting needs of the poor is the best marketing that a company can do. Generosity is actually the new marketing budget. So if you can meet needs and create more loyalty and more trust while you're doing that, you fulfill both a business purpose and a social needs purpose all at the same time. We actually have alignment with that now. We've never had alignment with it like that before. So we help companies move to a much more sophisticated marketing plan that creates far more trust and far more loyalty than what they do with their traditional flog the product stuff.
Yeah, I could definitely help you with that. I mean, I know enough people out there, I think.
Yeah.
Big value to that.
Yes. So, I mean, we're sitting in Keller Williams. We've got a number of Keller Williams folks that are using it now.
Yeah.
And some mortgage companies, automobile dealers, and so forth.
So how can people connect with you? You know, how would you like them to, form an alliance with you or at least make a first step to discussing how they could do business with you?
Mm-hmm. Well, go to worldchangers.reviews. That's the best place, worldchangers.reviews. And on that, there's a place to be able to put in your name and your email address, and then we'll reach back out to you and help you get set up. It's not that difficult. It probably takes someone a couple of hours to get everything set up. We'll work with them. Sits on your webpage. It's actually white labeled, so people look at it. It's your brand. We want to brand the company. We want companies to prosper,
right?
Because we believe companies prospering in this fashion is how we're going to address the issues of the poor. So we help people get set up, choose outcomes, buckets as we call it.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, the company chooses the buckets on that. Choose 4 buckets. We help coach them through that process to make sure that it's buckets that their customers are going to relate with and that they also are passionate about. There has to be alignment. We want to create it. They can either do it using it came out of SOZO. It actually began as a way of allowing the gift boxes to be a better experience with folks. But today we have companies that use gift boxes, and we have companies that don't use any gift boxes. We have companies that are so regulated. They can't even buy their wife a cup of coffee without going to jail. So they cannot use gifts at all.
Yeah.
But there is nothing in the law that says that I cannot send you, Rob, an opportunity to give with me. Yeah. Because you're not benefiting from it. I'm not benefiting from it. So it's all across the board. So you can use it with SOZO gifts. You can use it just running generosity campaigns, and we have a few other ways to be able to use that.
Okay, and then how can people connect with you in regard to SOZO? Is that through a different platform, or are you looking for active partnerships right now? Oh,
sure. We are always looking for active partnerships with people that we're able to serve well. You can actually do it through the same place, worldchangers.reviews. Just when you go in, make a note and say, I'd love to talk with someone about SOZO and the gift boxes.
SOZO.
SOZO, yes. Okay. SOZO. And you can ask us about that at World Changers Reviews. It's just as simple to do it that way.
Okay. So my last question to you, I like to ask this question. So I believe everybody in the world is 97% awesome, but I believe they are missing 3%, and that 3% is found in others, okay? In other words, I believe people need to align with people to have what I would call idealized success, right? We cannot do anything by ourselves, just by ourselves,
right?
Okay? So this is just a fun little exercise. You don't have to necessarily expose your weaknesses today, but if you are, what are you missing? Like, what are you not good at? Because you're clearly a good business leader. You're clearly focused. You're clearly passionate for people, heart-led, like I like to say. What do you think you're not very good at? That if somebody wanted to come into your life and say, "Hey, I really want to help Martin do X," what would they need to bring? What's a skill you don't possess?
I am not a good detail person.
Really?
No.
How's that possible with what you do? How is that possible? You must align with
surround myself with really good detail people. Yes.
Yeah.
I am definitely more of a big picture type person, seeing where all the dots are and trying to connect those things together. So without really good detail people around me, really good process oriented people around me, I'm in deep trouble.
Okay.
So that would be one place. And then the other that's kind of funny is, I am literally married to a saint. And I always laugh that I am probably the highest maintenance husband there is out there. We do a lot of entertaining. And my wife is the most organized, extraordinary person around that. So our lifestyle of hospitality, which for me is one of the most energizing things we do, is absolutely dependent on her organization. And if without it, it would be chaos. My kids would be a disaster if it wasn't for my wife.
Well, that makes sense. I met your wife 4 years ago, and I would say this, that just from that short, brief moment, I could tell she was a patient woman.
Yeah. Yes.
That's an amazing thing. We need that, don't we?
Oh, we do. We do. Our kids were always a little afraid when my wife would be gone and I was left to take care of them. They would be left at bus stops and.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Could you at least cook dinner?
Oh, I actually am a very good cook. They actually liked the food. They actually liked the food part if I remember to pick them up and bring them home.
Okay. You left them, Dad.
Yes.
Oh man.
Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you. It's funny. I think we got a nice tasty sum out of today's talk. I hope you were able to share the things you wanted to share.
Yeah.
It wasn't just me rambling on and dragging you through mud the whole time.
No, this was an enjoyable time. It's always enjoyable to be with you, Rob. So this is great.
Oh man,
thank you. Yeah.
Well, just bless you and keep doing what you do. I think it's extraordinary, and I think you can lead us down some amazing roads. So I'm going to listen back to this podcast and take your advice.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all listeners out there, and hopefully we can connect.
You don't want a revolution, just you sing along. This is my institution, and it's called rock and roll.